But never give up, no matter what. That was the theme of Louis Zamperini, the former Olympic track star who found himself on a raft for 47 days in the middle of the Pacific. The story that was told by this great book, Unbroken. I don't know how many of you have read that yet, but if you haven't, you want to pick it up, you want to watch the movie and so forth. And the premise of this series that we're doing, if you haven't caught on already, is that the Bible says that God has built within each of us a resiliency to not give up, a resiliency to keep going. And sometimes you say, I don't know if you say this, but this is just too much for me. I just can't handle anymore. God has put too much on me, or people have put on too much on me and I can't take anymore. It's not true. You have built within you a resiliency to overcome all kinds of things. So never give up. No matter what. Now today I want to tell you an unpublished story that my good friend John Berg heard from Louis when he did an interview with him, and next Sunday you're going to see that interview here in this service with Louis Zamperini. When Louis got back from World War II, he finally got off of the raft into the prison camp, out of the prison camp. War is over now, he goes home. And unlike our Vietnam veterans who came home and nobody really recognized them, World War II heroes were really recognized well. He was a national hero because he had been a track star, and the Japanese tried to use him for propaganda and the whole business. And so when he came home, he got all kinds of invitations. Now, he had some favorite movie stars. You know, you have your favorite stars that you like to go to movies to see. Two of his favorites were Laurel and Hardy. Now, some of you here are too young to know who Laurel and Hardy are. So for the sake of you younger people, I have just a little video that I want you to see who Laurel and Hardy were.
I beg your pardon. One more chance to a pub.
Now, Louis was in a bar at one of these fancy country clubs, and he was enjoying himself with some friends, and somebody passed him a note saying that Oliver Hardy is in the locker room, and he wants to meet you. And so here he is. He goes back to the locker room, and there's Oliver Hardy, buck naked, coming out of the shower, soaking wet, runs up to Louis and gives him a great big bear hug, soaking his clothes, and he says, "Louis, I prayed for you every day while you were lost at sea." Now, who would have guessed that Oliver Hardy prayed for him every single day? You know what that did for him? Oh my goodness. You have no idea what kind of impact that you're having on people. Now, in the book Unbroken, I like the title because it seemed that Louis was unbreakable. I mean, there was nothing that could stop him. A rough childhood couldn't. Pneumonia couldn't. Oh, actually, it was double pneumonia. Getting in trouble with the cops couldn't. Olympic competition couldn't. Nazi soldiers at the Berlin Olympics, even after he stole their flag, couldn't stop him. He was just unbroken. Even World War II, being in that raft for 47 days and getting shot up, I'm still amazed over how they were able to patch that raft after being shot up so many times. But they had a patch kit, as Pete was telling us on Thursday night. All of those, and they were able to do that. But that didn't stop him. Not the sharks, not starvation, not doldrums, not a typhoon, nothing. Being a POW in a horrible setting with the meanest guard in all of the Japanese army couldn't break him. Then he got liberated and he went home, unbroken, but not unscarred. And it wasn't until after Lewis got home to California that he emotionally broke down. And it's interesting that book Unbroken doesn't cover much about what happens after he gets home. And I'm so glad that Lewis wrote a book, his own account, about 10 years before he died. And now there's a sequel film out that you can buy on DVD or get it online, and about what happened. And while I believe it's true we're all born with an amazing amount of God-given resilience to withstand all kinds of trials, I believe that, those difficult times have a way of scarring us. And you know what scars are, right? I'm sure all of you have some scars. I just have to look at my hand, and there's a line down the palm of my hand. And it was when Bobby Kennedy's funeral procession was going by. I was fooling around with, on TV, I was fooling around with a plastic cup and a knife, and it went right into my hand. That scar is a reminder of Bobby Kennedy back in 1968. Scars stay with us for a long time. Now, we can be completely healed physically. There's nothing on the palm of my hand that, other than the line that's there, that's a reminder. But we carry the emotional scars for a long, long time. In some cases, 70 years. Picture life for Lewis when he returns home. I mean, he's a celebrated war hero. I mean, so much so that Universal Studios at that time contracted Tony Curtis to play him. Now, some of you younger people don't know who Tony Curtis was. I'm an old movie buff kind of thing, but in his day, he was the Brad Pitt or the Tom Cruise of his era. Now, you guys try to imagine Tom Cruise or Brad Pitt playing you, all right? Or if you're a woman, Meryl Streep playing you in a movie. I mean, that is heady stuff. And he's getting the phones ringing all the time to go to these prestigious country clubs and give talks and all this stuff. I mean, if you had that, they're just like beating down your door to get to you. He's so popular at this point. Little did anyone other than his wife and a few close friends knew that Lewis was very, very broken at this point. In the midst of all that you see, tonight is the Academy Awards, correct? You're going to see some of the most glamorous looking folks in all of the world. They will have clothes on that are worth probably more than my car. You know, and they're going to be parading down that red carpet and all that kind of stuff, and you're going to look at them, but know that all of them, like us, have issues that they're dealing with. And some of them are actually, the makeup and the clothes are just covering up the brokenness. So I said the last time we were together that Lewis found himself dreaming about strangling the worst guard in all of Japanese military, the Bird. He wanted so much to kill him. And he dreamt about this, and he actually got the guy around his neck and was choking, and he woke up and it was his pregnant wife. It's so sad. So what he had is he turned to drugs, a drug known as alcohol, to, quote, fix his problem that we now know as post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. That's a horrible choice for PTSD, horrible. Now, PTSD symptoms may result from a traumatic event that causes an overreactive adrenaline response, which creates deep neurological patterns in the brain. These patterns can persist long after the event that triggered them, making an individual overly responsive to future fearful situations. So for example, someone who has it, they're at a 4th of July celebration, everybody's laughing, drinking, having a great time, fireworks go off, boom, and they're just like, it's all over again, it's happening again. It's happening, and they sometimes freak out and have to get out of there, run away from there, or do worse things. Of course, not all of us have PTSD, but on a lower level than that, all of us are affected by traumatic experiences that have a way of helping us to say or do things we know that we shouldn't do. I'll give you a couple examples. If you grew up and somebody was always saying, well, that's not a very good job. Can't you do better? You bring a report card home and they say, yeah, you're improving, but that's not very good. You get a job, you take a job, and you've done overtime, you've done your very best, you're so proud of it, and your boss says, yeah, see if you can do better next time. Criticism. You go to your doctor and you tell her how well you are and how you've just run a half marathon and she should be proud of you, and she says, and you ran that far and you still couldn't lose weight? Criticism. It will plant itself in your brain. Another example. Let's say you were a child and you were walking along innocently, and some skateboarders came along. Now, I rode skateboards when I was a kid, and I like skateboarders and all that kind of stuff, but let's say skateboarders come along, and they're a mean group of skateboarders, and they take a branch on the ground and they whack you. And what does that do to you? You didn't get hurt that much physically, but what's that going to do to you? Every time you see a skateboarder, you're going to want to go the other direction. It plants itself within us. And for Louis Zamperini, he had these things in his head, these events that happened to him planted firmly in his head. And it's not until we all realize that we're broken in some way. Now, I hate to think that my kids are broken in some way, partially because of me. My wife and I think we did a great job raising our kids, and we are so proud of the job that we did. But they, too, deal with issues and things, sometimes mistakes that we made along the way. It's not until all of us realize that we're broken in some way and need help can we truly give our lives over to Christ. And the way we know we've given our lives to Christ is that we're led to do something that we're not comfortable with. Jim, were you real comfortable about getting up here and leading worship today?
Not extremely.
Not extremely comfortable, but you were willing to do it, yeah. For Lewis, it was to break the grip of alcoholism. And how, we said last week, how did he do that? He poured it down the drain. Wait a minute, that's a lot of money. And he could really have one last drink, or maybe one last week of drink. I was with our friends last night. We had a little dinner party and some games, and they all know that my wife and I are on this diet and stuff, and we're just like buzzkills in a dinner party kind of thing. And they tried to arrange, and they all need to have one of these diets, kind of thing. And the hostess said to us, I've learned that in dieting it has to hurt, and I don't want it to hurt. Okay, so what are you going to do? What's the alternative there? So for Lewis, pouring that wine down that he had, expensive stuff or whatnot, emptying out his cabinets, is what he knew he had to do. Later, it was to return to Japan. Return back to the skateboarders. Return back to whatever it was that traumatized him. His life was to return there and share the good news of forgiveness in Jesus Christ to the people who tortured him. But he could have run the other way. Just ignored Japan as if it didn't exist. And even when they started taking over the car market, continue buying Fords and Chevrolets, just ignore the whole Japanese invasion. I know people like that. Yeah. And many years later, it was to actually forgive the bird, that horrible guard. An interesting thing about humans is, if we think there's a tiny chance we can pull ourselves out of this brokenness, we'll rely on that chance. And that determination comes out of the same resilience that God built within us, but it starts to work against us. At that point, if we can realize that we're in a hole, and we're not going to get out of this hole on our own, that's when Jesus will become very real to us. So picture yourself in a hole. And I was going to show a video of that this morning, but I chose not to. I'm going to show it at another time. Picture yourself in a deep hole. Now, how are you going to get out of that hole? You're resourceful people. You know how you're going to do it, right? How are you going to do it? Anybody?
Depends on how big the hole is.
The hole is big enough so you can spread out like this, all right? How are you going to do it? Oh, it's as deep as what would be the ceiling in this place. Are there any ropes? Are there any ladders?
Roots.
Are any roots? What are you going to do with a root? You're going to climb the roots on the side. Are there any places where you can put your feet into the wall? Okay? Now, eventually it gets so you realize the walls are slick. They're a little bit wet. And you're down there, and there's nothing to hold on to. There's nothing to pull yourself up. Now what do? You're resourceful people. Come on. A day has gone by, and you're starting to get hungry. Actually, it would be just since breakfast. You're getting hungry. You've got to get out. What are you going to do? Yell! But nobody can find you, hear you. What are you going to do? Your voice is going hoarse now. The walls are slick. You can't get up. What are you going to do?
Pray. They didn't pray, but it did take a miracle. And how many miracles have been performed?
Yeah, pray. And how many prayers get answered like that? So now, okay, now along comes Jesus. Let's imagine along comes Jesus and drops a rope down for you. What are you going to do now? You're going to hold on to the rope? Or are you going to say, I can do this myself, Jesus. Keep on going. I'm going to get myself out. That's how you get into trouble. God will hear us. Now, take the Apostle Paul. And we read the scripture this morning about the Apostle Paul. Here he was, one of the most terrifying Jewish leaders of his time before he came to Christ. He's thinking he's doing God's will, and he's headed into Damascus, and his whole job is to kill Christians. And he thinks that he's doing it because God told him to go kill Christians. As if God wanted his Christ followers to be killed, right? Suddenly, he gets blinded by the light. You know the story. And we assume that's God's Spirit, all right? And he heard a voice say this, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? Anybody here hear a voice like that? You think you're doing God's will, and God says, why are you doing this against me? Oh boy, that's deflating. Saul asked, who are you, Lord? And he hears, I am Jesus whom you are persecuting. So now for 3 days, Saul couldn't see at all. He finds himself, ironically, at the mercy of the very Christians that he was headed to persecute. And Paul was a man who normally demanded and received respect. And when he ordered Christians imprisoned for following Jesus, it was done. Now, here he is. Powerful man, one rising in influence, but his eyesight's broken. And for 3 days, he was completely blind. All right, so now all that's taken away from him. All of his being able to rely upon himself is taken away from him. And more importantly, probably harder to his soul than the eyes was realizing that he had been going against what God wanted. He was disobeying God. And now this is a good description of brokenness. Physically and emotionally, Saul was broken. And while at the time, it probably seemed like the worst thing that could happen to him, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Because when we're broken, positive and permanent growth can take place. Because what it does is it breaks down our self-reliance. So way out over the Pacific Ocean, over 40 days without a glimmer of hope, burned, dehydrated, and sick, Lewis had nowhere else to turn but to God. No one else to rely on. The same for the future Apostle Paul, no one else to rely on. But you and I both know God first, do we? Why not? Because we're resilient. Didn't we say that? Never give up? Have you forgotten? You're down in that hole. You've been given a resilience to withstand this stuff. You can do anything if you put your mind to it, right? Isn't that what you're told? There's never a situation where you're lost. And often we start looking around for the cause of the problem. Who dug this hole? Why was this hole here? Why wasn't there a grate over this hole? And we try to fix it ourselves. For a broken church, it must be the pastor. Or it must be the elders, right? Or it must be the choice of worship music. Have you ever heard that about a church? The reason that there's not thousands of people going there is because of the songs that they're singing. And for a while in the Presbyterian church, it was the approval of new ordination standards. That's the reason why the Presbyterian church is declining, they would say. Now, Louis Zamperini knew he was broken the night he stood in Billy Graham's tent in downtown Los Angeles and heard the good news of Jesus Christ. But he didn't make excuses about how he got there. He didn't make suggestions for what he could do to fix his condition. Louis Zamperini did the only thing that makes sense when we finally realize that we're broken and stuck in a hole, and that is what? Repent and turn to Jesus. What we have to know and realize is that even when we turn to Jesus as a broken person, that broken area still may remain a vulnerable spot in your life. You know, I have this beautiful vase. I should have brought it in. Somebody gave it to me as a gift. And you know what the first thing I did with that vase was? It was a gift from my office back in Texas. You know the first thing I did with that vase? Is I knocked it over. And I broke it into a bunch of little pieces. Well, being a good pastor, I didn't want to offend the person that had given it to me. And so I glued it all back together again. And then the broken part that I had glued, I put it toward the back. And so when they would come by to see me and wave, oh, I love the vase here. Look at how nice it's look. But I knew that vase still had scars from when I had knocked it over. And for us, we have the same thing. There's never a time when we can say, I'm not a broken person. There's never been a church in existence that can say it's not a broken church. And I don't care if it's got thousands of people lined up to try to get in the door with all the bells and whistles of the great churches of the world right now. That is a broken church. And you know how I know that's a broken church? Because it's made up of people And all of us are broken people. And sometimes the glue holding a person together just gives out and causes all kinds of trouble in the church. And the master has to put us back together. But recognize that's who we are. That's why Jesus, except for the grace of God, we are what we are. So this is what I want you to do. I want you to be patient with one another. In this church, I don't see anything by terms of people fighting or anything going on. It's just kind of weird. Today's our annual meeting, and normally I have sweaty palms and don't sleep the night before annual meetings kind of thing, because there's often unrest. This church is very, very much united together, and I appreciate that. But I want you to be patient with one another. I want you also to be patient with the politicians right now, all right? On both sides of what happened in this past week. Because everyone and every church is working through something. Some of you are working through some back pains. Some of you are working through the loss of a loved one. Some of you are working through the pending loss of someone. Some of you are working through all kinds of issues of lack of hope in the future and so forth. We don't know where you are. And what I urge you to do is work through that brokenness with Christ. Recognize that you have that, and that God will put you together. So if you find yourself in that deep hole, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? Come on, tell me. Is that all? You're just going to pray? You're not going to grab that rope that when he sends it down, you're going to just pray? Is that how you're going to use that rope? You're going to pull yourself up because Jesus has provided that rope, and you're going to go on and he's going to rebuild us.